He was cold to everyone, until the little girl said, "You promised her." The grand ballroom of the Harrow Industries headquarters pulsed with laughter, champagne, and polite applause. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns. At the center of it all stood Victor Harrow, CEO and modern titan of steel and technology. Sharp-jawed and cold-eyed, he raised a glass to the crowd. "To the future," he declared. The guests echoed the toast, but none missed the way Victor's eyes held no warmth. His smile was precise, mechanical, like every move he made. Victor Harrow had earned his fortune by being ruthless. Mergers, acquisitions, and iron-fisted leadership. His employees respected him but feared him more. Rumors whispered about his past, an estranged wife, a child he never acknowledged, a heart that had calcified long ago. He dismissed such gossip with silence and a steely stare. As the orchestra played a refined melody, Victor moved through the crowd, nodding when expected, offering brief congratulations to award recipients. Then, just as he turned toward the stairs leading to his private suite, a small hand tugged at the hem of his expensive suit. He looked down, surprised and irritated. A little girl stood there, no more than 9 years old. Straight brown hair framed her delicate face, and her dark eyes shimmered with certainty rather than fear. She wore a simple navy dress, slightly wrinkled, with scuffed shoes. She didn't belong in this world of glitter and power, and yet she stood tall. "Can I help you?" Victor asked, voice tight with the forced patience he used on uninvited guests. The girl stared up at him, unwavering. "You promised her," she said simply. Victor blinked. "Excuse me?" "You promised her," the girl repeated. Her voice was calm but firm, almost rehearsed. "You said you would come back, but you never did." Silence fell in the air around them. The music played on, oblivious, but the moment thickened like a held breath. Victor's spine straightened. Something in the way she looked at him, so certain, so unshakable, unsettled him in a way no boardroom ever had. Who are you talking about?" he asked more quietly now. The ice in his tone cracked ever so slightly. The girl looked him in the eye. "My mom." Victor's breath caught. He didn't know why. He had heard 1,000 claims, 1,000 accusations, but this one was different. There was something terrifyingly familiar about her face, her eyes maybe, or her tone. She took a step closer, unafraid. "She waited every year on that porch. She said you'd remember. She said you promised." Victor's heart, so long sealed behind marble and steel, thudded once, louder than before. Before he could respond, a woman's voice called from across the ballroom. "Ellie, come back here." The girl glanced toward the voice, then back to him. "She's coming," she said, "but I had to tell you first." Then she turned and ran. Victor stood frozen, the world dimming around him, one phrase echoing like thunder in his ears. "You promised her." Victor didn't move, not as the child disappeared into the crowd, not as her mother, presumably, brushed past him, giving only a polite nod. He didn't register the toasts continuing or the laughter swelling again. His glass remained untouched, fingers curled tightly around the stem. The words clung to his ears like a haunting melody. "You promised her." His security detail approached discreetly. "Mr. Harrow, everything all right?" He nodded once, mechanically, and walked away without another word. Up the spiral staircase through a private corridor lined with oil paintings and glass awards, and into his office. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it. For a moment he allowed the tremor in his hand to show. The girl's face, those eyes, he had seen them before, long ago. They belonged to someone he had tried to forget, someone he had buried beneath layers of business meetings, global expansions, and endless distractions. He opened a drawer in his mahogany desk. Inside was an old photograph, creased and faded with time. A woman, young and bright-eyed, smiling with wild daisies in her hair. Beside her, Victor himself, 20 years younger, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, a rare, genuine smile on his face. Her name was Mara, and suddenly he was 25 again, standing in a small town in Oregon, barefoot on a porch, swearing under a pink sunset. No matter what happens, he had whispered to Mara, I'll come back, I promise. But he hadn't. He had left for New York with dreams and a hunger for greatness. The calls became infrequent. Then they stopped. A letter came once, a long one, full of hope and fear. She had written, You said you'd come back, I'm still waiting. He never responded. Too busy. Too ashamed. Now, nearly a decade later, a girl with her face had walked into his world and shattered his illusion of peace. He dropped into his leather chair, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced, not with quarterly reports, but with memories, daisies, guitar strings, laughter under the stars. He tapped his desk intercom. Claire, he said, voice low, find out everything you can about a guest named Ellie from tonight's event. 9 years old. Brown hair. Came with a woman, her mother. There was a pause. Sir, we don't have children on the official guest list. Then look harder. Yes, Mr. Harrow. He ended the call and sat in silence. Outside, the party raged on, but in the office, time had stopped. Victor leaned forward and stared at the photo again. Mara, he whispered, barely audible. Did you really wait for me? And as if summoned by those words, a memory emerged, one he had locked away. The last thing she had said to him, the night he left, if you break your promise one day, she'll come find you. He hadn't believed her then, but now he wasn't so sure. The following morning, Victor arrived at the office before the sun touched the city skyline. The staff wasn't used to seeing him this early, especially not looking so disheveled. Tie askew, no coffee in hand, shadows under his eyes. Claire, his efficient assistant, waited nervously outside his office with a folder in hand. You found her? He asked, cutting straight to the point. Claire nodded. Sort of. There was no child named Ellie on the guest list, but after reviewing the security footage, we traced her and the woman she came with. Her name is Julia Bennett. She's not an employee here. She was invited as a +1 by someone from our marketing department. Victor's eyes narrowed. Julia Bennett. Claire opened the folder, revealing a few printed photographs from security cams, grainy but clear enough. In one, Julia held Ellie's hand. The resemblance was now undeniable. Julia's features were softer than Mara's, but the eyes were the same. And Ellie had his jawline. She lives in Eastbridge, small neighborhood outside the city. I pulled her address. Victor took the page and stared at it, as if trying to decipher a message hidden in the letters. Thank you, Claire. Cancel my meetings for the day. All of them? She asked, surprised. He didn't answer. He was already out the door. The drive to Eastbridge took an hour, and with every mile, Victor's pulse grew heavier. What was he walking into? A trap? A lie? Or a truth he had spent years trying to bury? The neighborhood was modest. Red brick houses, flower beds, children's bikes scattered across lawns. It was the kind of place Victor had fled from as a young man, swearing he'd never look back. He parked across from a small white house with chipped paint and wind chimes on the porch. A swing creaked softly in the breeze, and there, through the front window, he saw her, Julia. She moved through the living room, folding laundry, a familiar rhythm in her gestures. She hadn't seen him yet. And beside her, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Ellie, drawing something with colored pencils. Victor's breath caught. His hand hovered over the car door handle for several seconds before he finally pushed it open and stepped out. Each footstep up the driveway felt heavier than the last. At the porch, he paused, staring at the old wooden door. There was a deep scratch on it, almost shaped like a heart. He remembered carving that once, a summer afternoon. He and Mara had laughed as he etched their initials in the wood. Before he could knock, the door opened. Julia stood there, startled at first, then frozen. Her eyes widened, not in shock, but in recognition. She didn't speak. Victor swallowed hard. I need to talk to you. Julia's voice was calm but tight. Took you long enough. From inside the house, Ellie's voice rang out. Mom, who's at the door? Julia stepped aside. Victor met Ellie's eyes again. And this time she didn't look like a stranger at all. Victor stepped into the modest home, his polished shoes clicking softly on the hardwood floor. The scent of vanilla and something freshly baked clung to the air, grounding him in a reality that felt both foreign and familiar. He scanned the living room, a well-loved couch, toys neatly stored in baskets, a shelf lined with children's books and a few framed photographs. It wasn't extravagant, but it radiated warmth, something his penthouse never did. Ellie stood by the coffee table, her drawing clutched in her hand. Her eyes flicked between her mother and Victor, curiosity sparking in her gaze. She wasn't afraid, just expectant. Julia shut the door behind them and crossed her arms. "Sit if you want," she said flatly, nodding toward the couch. "Or just say what you came to say." Victor remained standing. "I saw her last night, at the gala. She said, 'I promised you.'" "You did," Julia replied sharply. "Not just her, you promised Mara, you promised you'd come back." His shoulders sagged. "I didn't know Mara had a child." Julia gave a soft, incredulous laugh. "Of course you didn't. You never wrote back, never called. She was going to tell you, but after you disappeared, she didn't see the point. She thought she'd handle it on her own." Victor looked at Ellie again, heart thudding. "She's Mara's daughter." Julia gave him a long look, then nodded slowly. "And yours." The room swirled around him. He sat heavily on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees. Why didn't she try harder to reach me?" "She did," Julia said, voice softer now. "She sent letters, made calls. After a while she stopped. She said if you wanted to come back, you would. She never wanted Ellie to grow up chasing someone who didn't care." Victor pressed a hand to his forehead, overwhelmed. "I cared. I was just lost in all of it. My career, my ambition. I didn't know how to go back once I'd left." Julia's face twisted, not with anger, but with pain. "Mara waited for you every year on her birthday. She'd sit on the porch with that same hopeful look in her eyes until the year she got sick." He looked up sharply. "Sick?" "She passed 3 years ago, Victor." The words hit him like a brick to the chest. "She had cancer. It happened fast. She didn't want you to know. Didn't want pity. But before she died, she told Ellie everything about you, about the promise." Victor turned to Ellie. She was still watching him, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Ellie stepped forward, holding up the drawing in her hand. "This is us. You and Mommy and me. I made it before the gala, just in case." Victor took the paper with trembling hands. Crayon figures held hands under a bright yellow sun. A little girl between a man in a suit and a woman with daisies in her hair. His eyes stung as he looked back at her. "You knew I'd come?" Ellie nodded. "Mom said you would. One day." Silence settled over the room, heavy but not hostile. Victor stared at the drawing for a long moment, the childlike strokes and bright colors clashing with the storm inside him. He felt the sharp edges of guilt, the ache of time lost, and the fragile flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. Julia sat down across from him, still guarded. "So what now?" she asked. "You found out. Are you going to vanish again?" Victor looked up slowly, his gaze earnest. "I don't want to. He struggled for the right words. "I don't know how to fix this. I can't bring back the years, or Mara. But I want to be here. For Ellie. If you'll let me." Julia studied him, unsure if she was looking at the same man who walked away all those years ago. He looked older now, worn, not just from time, but from regret. "I don't know what she needs from you," Julia said cautiously. "She's done okay. We've made a life. But she's always had questions, always felt something was missing. So if you're serious, you need to prove it's not just guilt driving you here." Victor nodded. "I will. I don't expect trust overnight. I just want a chance." Ellie approached the coffee table and picked up a second sheet of paper. "Can I show you my room?" Victor blinked, surprised. "You want me to see it?" She shrugged with a tiny smile. "You're my dad, right?" The word hit him like a tidal wave. Simple, innocent, and devastating. He managed a nod. "Yes, I am." She took his hand without hesitation and led him down the narrow hallway past family photos that didn't include him and into a small bedroom filled with stuffed animals and shelves of books. A few trophies lined one wall, spelling bees, art contests, a ribbon for science fair. "This one was Mommy's," Ellie said, pointing to a faded ribbon on the nightstand. "She gave it to me when I was sad." Victor picked it up gently, his fingers brushing over the worn fabric. "She would have been so proud of you." Ellie beamed. "That's what Aunt Julia says too." Victor turned toward the window. Outside, the sky had shifted, grey clouds moving in slowly, as if echoing the change inside him. He felt the weight of everything he had missed, but also the beginning of something new, something real. From the doorway, Julia watched them. Her expression was unreadable, but her arms were no longer crossed. Her guard, just slightly, had begun to fall. Victor crouched beside Ellie's bookshelf and pulled out a worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. "I used to read this to your mom," he said softly. "She'd always cry at the end." Ellie giggled. "Me too." He smiled, a real, quiet smile. "Would you like me to read it to you now?" Ellie nodded eagerly, and as Victor began to read, his voice thick with emotion, Julia leaned silently against the doorframe, her eyes filling with tears. Down the hall, the old wind chimes stirred again. Days turned into weeks, and slowly Victor Harrow's life began to shift. He still wore his tailored suits and ran board meetings with the same sharp precision, but something had changed behind his eyes. The cold detachment was giving way to something warmer, something deeply human. At Harrow Industries, whispers started about how the infamous CEO was leaving early some days, spending weekends out of town, and even smiling during calls. Every Friday evening, Victor would drive to Eastbridge. Julia never said it aloud, but she began setting an extra place at dinner. Ellie would be waiting by the window when the streetlights came on. It became routine, boardroom by day, bedtime stories by night. Still, rebuilding trust was not a straight road. One evening, as Victor helped Ellie with her math homework, she looked up suddenly and asked, "Why did you leave Mommy?" He froze, pencil in hand. Julia was in the kitchen, listening, not interfering. Victor lowered his voice. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" she asked, furrowing her brow. "Of not being good enough," he said. "Of failing her. Of failing you." Ellie thought for a moment. "Did Mommy know you were scared?" "I don't think so," he whispered. "I never told her. I should have." She reached for his hand. "I think she knew. That's why she told me you'd come one day. She said you were lost, but not gone." Victor blinked rapidly. "She said that?" Ellie nodded like it was the most natural truth in the world. "She always believed in you." Later that night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Julia sat across from Victor in the living room, a mug of tea in her hands. "She really did believe in you, you know, even when I didn't." Victor looked down, ashamed. "I don't deserve that." Julia tilted her head. "Maybe not, but she gave it anyway. The question is, what are you going to do with it now?" That question followed him home. His penthouse felt colder than ever, like a museum to a man he no longer wanted to be. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, staring out over the city he'd conquered. It all felt hollow now. The next morning, he made a decision. At the office, he summoned Claire. "I want to establish a new division," he said, "a foundation, named after Mara, for single mothers, education, healthcare, whatever they need. I want it built now." Claire blinked. "Sir, that's unexpected." Victor nodded. "It's overdue." And when the first press release went out, the Mara Hope Foundation, a Harrow initiative, Victor didn't care what the world assumed. For the first time, he wasn't doing it for image or strategy. He was doing it because it mattered. That night, when Ellie saw the headline, she smiled and hugged him tight. "I knew you remembered her," she whispered. Victor held her close, and for once didn't feel like a stranger to his own life. Spring came to Eastbridge with bursts of color, blooming cherry blossoms, the scent of lilacs drifting through open windows, and laughter echoing down quiet streets. Victor began spending more time at Julia's house, not as a visitor, but as someone trying to find his place. He helped with school projects, fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, and even got roped into painting Ellie's room a bright shade of sky blue. But the more Victor gave of himself, the more something inside him trembled. The memories of Mara were no longer faint echoes. They were vivid, constant. He would hear a song she used to hum and find himself unable to speak. Ellie's expressions, her gestures, so much of her was Mara. One Sunday afternoon, while Ellie was at a birthday party and Julia was folding laundry, Victor stood in the backyard looking at the garden. "She used to love daisies," he said aloud. Julia looked up from the laundry basket. "She planted some, over there." She pointed to the far corner of the yard, where a small cluster of wild daisies swayed gently in the breeze. "I remember," he murmured. "We picked them together the night before I left." Julia's hands slowed. "You never told her why, you know. You just vanished." He turned to her, guilt deepening. "I didn't know how to say goodbye. I kept thinking I'd make it, that I'd come back with something better to offer. But time got away from me, and by then, I didn't think I was worthy." Julia looked at him, her eyes not harsh but honest. "You weren't," he nodded. "I know. But you're trying now," she continued, softer. "And maybe that counts for something." Victor crossed the lawn to the daisies and knelt beside them. He brushed his fingers over the petals and closed his eyes. "I keep wondering what she'd say if she saw me now." Julia joined him, kneeling beside him. "She'd say you're late, but she'd be glad you came." They sat there in silence, the daisies moving with the wind. Inside the house, Victor noticed something new. A photograph of Mara had appeared on the mantel, placed next to one of Ellie. He hadn't seen it before. In the picture, Mara stood on a hilltop, arms stretched wide, wind in her hair, laughing. She looked so alive, so free. That night, as Victor tucked Ellie into bed, she reached under her pillow and pulled out a small box. "I was saving this for when I really knew you were staying," she said, handing it to him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a tiny silver locket. "It was Mommy's," Ellie explained. "She told me to give it to you when the time was right." Victor's throat tightened as he opened the locket. Inside was a photo of Mara holding a newborn, Ellie. On the other side, a slip of paper, barely legible, read, "For the day he finds his way back." Victor clutched the locket and whispered, "I'm here now. I promise." News of the Mara Hope Foundation spread quickly. It wasn't just another corporate initiative, it had heart, and people noticed. Journalists praised Victor Harrow's transformation, tabloids speculated about his personal life, and former rivals began to look at him with a new, reluctant respect. But Victor didn't care about the attention. His focus remained on Julia, on Ellie, and on doing something worthy of the promise he had broken so long ago. Still, not everyone welcomed his reformation. One Thursday morning, Claire entered Victor's office with a grim expression. "You should see this," she said, placing a thick envelope on his desk. Victor opened it slowly. Inside were printed screenshots, emails between board members. Some were questioning his judgment, others outright mocking his charity project. One message, signed by Charles DeWitt, the company's longtime CFO, read, "He's distracted, soft. We should be thinking about succession." Victor leaned back, tension tightening his jaw. Claire hesitated before speaking. "They're planning a vote. They think you've lost your edge." Victor looked out the window. "Because I care." "They don't see it that way," she said. "They think you're a liability now, too emotional." He rose from his chair, calm but resolute. "Let them vote." Later that day, Victor met with his legal team and secured every asset related to the Mara Hope Foundation, making sure it could never be touched by Harrow Industries politics. Then, he drafted a letter to the board. It was brief, direct, and final. He was stepping down. Claire burst into his office. "You're serious?" Victor nodded. I'm done running an empire built on fear. Let them have it. I've got something better now. The news hit the industry like a bomb. CEOs don't just walk away, not without scandal or force, but Victor Harrow did, on his own terms. And in doing so, he made headlines again, this time for something rarer: redemption. Back in Eastbridge, Julia read the announcement aloud from her phone. "You really did it," she murmured. Victor sat across the room, quietly folding one of Ellie's blankets. "I did. I'm done pretending the company is more important than people." Julia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "So what happens now?" He stood and walked over to her, meeting her eyes. "Now I build something real." That evening they all sat on the porch, Ellie on Victor's lap, Julia beside them. They watched the sun sink beneath the rooftops, turning the sky to gold. "Can we plant more daisies tomorrow?" Ellie asked sleepily. Victor kissed the top of her head. "As many as you want." Julia smiled faintly. She'd like that. He turned to her. "Would you?" There was a long pause, filled only by the wind and the creak of the porch swing. Julia didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached over, laced her fingers with his and said, "We'll see." And in that quiet promise, something deeper bloomed, fragile but finally real. The next morning, Victor woke to the sound of birdsong and the smell of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. Sunlight spilled across the bedroom he had begun to call his own, still spare, still unfamiliar, but softening with each passing day. On the nightstand sat the locket, always within reach. He reached for it instinctively, thumbing the edges before getting up. Downstairs he found Julia at the stove, Ellie dancing around the kitchen in mismatched socks, singing along to a song on the radio. "Good morning," Julia said, glancing over her shoulder with a tired but warm smile. Victor kissed Ellie on the head and wrapped an arm gently around Julia's waist. "Smells amazing." "I'm teaching Ellie to make pancakes," Julia said. "It's going about as well as you'd expect." Ellie grinned, her cheeks smudged with flour. "I only burned 2. Victor laughed, a sound so rare in his past life it startled even him. "That's a record." They sat together at the table, passing plates, pouring syrup, making a mess of everything. But for the first time in decades, Victor felt like he belonged somewhere, not as a CEO, not as a provider, but as a father, as part of a home. After breakfast, they went into the backyard and began planting daisies. Victor dug gently into the earth, his hands unfamiliar with the motion but steady. Ellie carefully placed each flower, humming to herself, while Julia watered the soil. There was something sacred about the moment, like they were burying the past in order to grow something entirely new. As they worked, Ellie paused and looked up at him. "Can I call you Dad now?" Victor's heart clenched. "Only if you want to." She smiled. "I do." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Then I'd be honored." Later that afternoon, Victor received a call from an unknown number. He stepped away to answer, and a voice on the other end greeted him coldly. "Victor Harrow?" "Yes." "This is Charles DeWitt. I wanted to give you the courtesy of a warning. The board is voting tomorrow. Your departure won't go as quietly as you think." Victor smiled. "Charles, I don't think you understand. I want them to move on. Let them. I've already built something better." Charles scoffed. "You're throwing it all away for... what? A woman and a child?" Victor's voice dropped. "For a family. For the first real thing in my life." He hung up before Charles could respond. Back inside, Ellie ran to him, waving another drawing. "Look, it's our garden." Victor knelt beside her and studied the page. Flowers in bloom, 3 smiling figures, and above them, a blue sky with the words, "We're together now." He looked over at Julia, who had been watching quietly. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, something tentative, something brave. And as the evening sun bathed the house in gold, Victor realized the life he'd once abandoned had waited for him longer than he deserved, but it was still here, still possible, still his to choose. A week later, The first ceremony of the Mara Hope Foundation was held in a modest community center in downtown Eastbridge. No red carpets, no paparazzi, just rows of folding chairs, fresh daisies in mason jars, and families seated shoulder to shoulder. Julia stood by the refreshment table, helping volunteers arrange cookies and lemonade. Ellie wore a light yellow dress and clutched a handmade speech in her tiny hands. Victor stood behind the podium, heart pounding, not from nerves, but from the weight of meaning. This wasn't a pitch to investors or a quarterly announcement. This was his first public act as a man who had finally returned home to himself. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His voice was steady, but his eyes swept across the crowd with humility. "This foundation is named after a woman who believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Mara Bennett was brave, compassionate, and strong. She raised a daughter on her own, never asking for help, never asking for recognition." He paused, catching Ellie's gaze. "She taught me that redemption isn't a destination. It's a choice you make every day. This, today, is one of mine." The crowd applauded gently. When Victor stepped aside, Ellie walked up, standing on tiptoe behind the microphone. She unfolded her speech, the paper shaking slightly. "My name is Ellie, and I want to tell you something about my mommy," she said clearly. "She used to sing to me at night. She said daisies are strong because they grow even in the cracks. She said love is like that too." She turned toward Victor. "And now my daddy is here. He's learning to grow things, like me." Gasps and soft murmurs rippled through the room, but no one moved. Ellie smiled. "So if you feel like someone forgot you, maybe they just didn't know how to come back yet. But they can." When she finished, the room erupted in quiet, heartfelt applause. Victor met her halfway and lifted her into his arms, pressing his forehead to hers. After the event, as people mingled and shared stories, an older woman approached Victor. "I knew Mara," she said gently. "She talked about you." "Even when she was sick?" Victor's voice caught. "What did she say?" "She said, if he ever finds his way back, tell him he's forgiven." Victor closed his eyes, holding back tears. "Thank you." That night, they returned home under a blanket of stars. Julia tucked Ellie in while Victor stood at the door, watching them with reverence. When Julia turned to him, her eyes softer now, she said, "You really meant it." He nodded. "Every part of it." She stepped closer. "Then stay. For real this time." "I will," he whispered. She reached up and touched the locket around his neck. "She gave you back to us." Victor pulled her into a quiet embrace. "And I'm never leaving again." In the hallway, the wind chimes rang gently, and for the first time in years, they sounded like peace. 6 months passed and the seasons turned once again. Autumn painted the trees of Eastbridge in shades of gold and fire, and the small white house where Julia, Ellie, and now Victor lived was alive with warmth. Laughter echoed from the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and apples drifted through the air, and on weekends Victor could be found at the farmer's market, carrying bags, holding Ellie's hand, listening to her chatter about school. But even as their new life unfolded gently, shadows of the past began to creep in. One afternoon, while Julia was at work and Victor was helping Ellie with her school project, a knock sounded at the door. Victor opened it, expecting a neighbor, but instead found a sharply dressed woman in her late 50s. Her eyes were piercing, her posture straight as a blade. "Victor Harrow?" she asked. "Yes. Can I help you?" She extended a hand. "I'm Evelyn Walsh, Mara's mother." Victor's world tilted. He hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since a strained holiday visit just before he left for New York. She had never liked him, too ambitious, too selfish, too distracted for her only daughter. But now, standing in his doorway, her expression wasn't angry. It was unreadable. Ellie peeked around the corner. "Dad, who is it?" Victor hesitated. "Ellie, this is your grandmother." Evelyn's lips parted slightly, but she didn't step inside. Ellie tilted her head. "I didn't know I had a grandma." Evelyn's eyes flicked toward her granddaughter, and something in her face softened, almost imperceptibly. "You do, and I've waited a long time to meet you." Victor's heart pounded. "Come in." Evelyn entered the house slowly, taking in the space, the photographs, the feeling of a life rebuilt. She sat stiffly at the edge of the couch while Ellie disappeared to her room, sensing the adult conversation to come. "I got your foundation's newsletter," Evelyn said. "Your name's been in the papers again, but not for business this time." Victor nodded. "I'm not that man anymore." She studied him. "Mara believed you'd come back. I told her she was foolish." "I was foolish," he replied. "But she wasn't wrong to believe." Evelyn's gaze drifted to the locket around his neck. "She gave that to Ellie." "She gave it to us," he said quietly. There was a long silence. Then Evelyn spoke again, her voice unsteady. "I want to be part of her life. Ellie's. I've made mistakes too. I kept my distance because seeing her would have meant facing what I lost. Victor understood all too well. "I can't decide for Ellie," he said. "But if you're here for her, not to reopen wounds or judge, then yes, she deserves to know her family." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "She reminds me of Mara. So much." From the hallway, Ellie peeked out again. "Is it okay if I show her my scrapbook?" Victor smiled gently. "I think she'd like that." And just like that, the past began to make room for healing. Evelyn returned the next weekend, this time with a small velvet-covered box in her hand and a quiet hope behind her carefully composed expression. Ellie greeted her at the door with the ease of a child who had already made up her mind, offering hugs without hesitation, asking questions without fear. Victor watched from the kitchen as the two sat on the living room floor, the scrapbook between them. He stirred soup absent-mindedly, half listening to the rhythm of their conversation. Ellie's excited voice, Evelyn's measured responses, the soft laughter that bridged generations. When Julia arrived home and saw them together, she paused at the doorway, visibly startled. Victor met her gaze and gave a slight nod. "She's trying." Julia approached slowly, setting her bag down, still unsure. "This wasn't exactly part of the plan." "I know," Victor said, "but maybe the plan's better this way." Later, while Ellie was upstairs taking a bath, Evelyn sat with Victor and Julia at the table. She opened the velvet box and placed it gently in the center. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. Small charms hung from it, each one etched with a name: Mara, Julia, Evelyn, and now Ellie. "I had it made after Mara passed," Evelyn explained, voice trembling. "I didn't think I'd ever get the chance to give it to her. But maybe it's time." Julia blinked rapidly, caught off guard by the gesture. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know I judged you both," Evelyn continued, "and I know I failed Mara in the end. I shut down when she needed me most. I thought it made me strong, but I see now, it just made me disappear." Victor reached for the bracelet, turning it in his hand. "We all disappeared, one way or another. And now," Evelyn asked, not just to him, but to the room, to fate itself. "Now," Julia said gently, "we show up." The next day they all went to the park together, a strange sight to onlookers. The once feared CEO pushing a swing, a refined older woman carrying a kite, and Julia with her camera, snapping candid photos of a new kind of family in motion. While Victor and Ellie flew the kite, Evelyn pulled Julia aside. "She's incredible," Evelyn said, watching Ellie run. "And you've raised her so well." Julia looked at her, wary. "Why now? Why come back after all this time?" Evelyn inhaled deeply. "Because I saw her eyes in the newsletter photo, and I knew if I didn't come now I'd never forgive myself." Julia nodded slowly, softening. "She has Mara's eyes, but her own heart." Evelyn smiled for the first time without sorrow. "Then maybe there's hope for me too." Back at the swing set, Ellie called out, "Grandma, help me fly it higher." Evelyn laughed, truly laughed, and ran toward her. Victor stood still for a moment, taking in the scene. This wasn't the life he had envisioned when he left Mara. It was better, because it was real. As fall deepened and the days grew shorter, life in Eastbridge settled into something unexpected but deeply cherished. Sunday dinners became a ritual. Evelyn now brought homemade pies. Ellie led conversations like a little hostess, and Victor, once a man who spoke only in boardroom briefings, now listened intently, laughed often, and learned the art of simply being present. One chilly evening, after Ellie had gone to bed and Evelyn had left, Julia and Victor sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching their breath swirl in the cold air. "She told me tonight," Julia said quietly, "that she wants to write a story about her family, for school." Victor turned to her. "What kind of story?" "A true one," Julia smiled. "With a little magic," she said. He chuckled softly. "Sounds about right." Julia looked at him for a long moment. "She told me she wants you to help her write it." Victor's smile faded into something more serious. "I'd be honored." They sat in silence for a while before Julia added, "I think she forgave you a long time ago, before she even met you." Victor's eyes shimmered in the porch light. "What about you?" She looked away, thoughtful. "That's been harder." He nodded slowly, expecting the answer, respecting its truth. "But," she added, "you're showing up, every day. You're consistent. You listen. And when she cries at night about missing Mara, you hold her and cry too." Victor's voice broke slightly. "Because I miss her too." Julia reached for his hand. "Then maybe I'm getting there, one day at a time." The next week, Victor surprised Ellie with a small wooden desk for her room. On it he placed a typewriter, vintage, just like the one Mara used to dream about owning. Ellie's eyes widened. "It's just like Mommy's stories." He smiled. "That's why I found it." They began writing together in the afternoons. Ellie would dictate and Victor would type. Sometimes they'd switch, and she'd hammer at the keys with dramatic flair. The story was simple. A little girl finds her father in a forgotten place and helps him find his way home. Each chapter ended with a new flower blooming. At the end of each writing session, they'd place the pages into a binder. Ellie insisted on decorating it with stickers, stars, hearts, and a single daisy on the cover. "This is our book," she declared, and in many ways it was. One afternoon, Julia joined them and began illustrating scenes in the margins. Mara on the porch, Victor in a suit standing beneath the stars, Ellie holding a kite string with both hands. They worked side by side, a family of three, binding broken stories into something whole. And when Evelyn read the first few chapters aloud one evening, her voice cracked on the final line. He promised her, and this time, he kept it. No one spoke. No one needed to. The promise had been rewritten, and it was real. As the holidays approached, Eastbridge shimmered with festive lights and quiet anticipation. Wreaths adorned every door, laughter rang from the town square, and Ellie counted down the days to Christmas with uncontainable joy. But for Victor, the season also brought reflection and a sense of incompleteness that stirred just beneath the surface. One evening, as snow began to fall gently outside, Victor sat in the den flipping through an old photo album Evelyn had brought over. Among the yellowed pages were photos of Mara as a child, Mara in high school with her wild hair and rebellious smile, and one faded shot of her holding a newborn clearly taken in secret, eyes wide with wonder and exhaustion. Evelyn appeared beside him quietly. "That was the day Ellie was born. Mara didn't want me to take it, said she looked terrible. But I knew she'd want it someday." Victor traced the edge of the photo. "I wish I'd known, I wish I'd been there." Evelyn sat beside him. She did too, but she never let it turn into bitterness. She believed people could come back from their worst. He closed the album gently. "I want to give Ellie something this year, something more than toys or books." Evelyn waited. "I want to legally adopt her," he said. "Give her my name, if she wants it." Evelyn's eyes filled. "She'll want that. But it has to be her choice." Julia's reaction later that night was a mixture of surprise and silence. "I hadn't even considered that," she said. "Not because I don't trust you, but because we've been so focused on healing. Victor nodded. I don't want to push, but I want her to know she's not temporary to me. I'm here for good. Julia took his hand. Then let's ask her. Together. The next morning they sat Ellie down at the kitchen table, each with a mug of hot cocoa, steam swirling between them. Victor looked nervous, like a man about to propose. Ellie, he said, I want to ask you something important. She tilted her head, curious. I'd like to make it official. If you want, I'd like to adopt you. You'd still be Ellie, but you could be Ellie Harrow, my daughter, legally. Ellie blinked at him for a long moment. You mean forever? He smiled. Yes, forever. She grinned slowly. Can I still write Ellie Bennett Harrow on my school papers? I like both. Victor laughed, tears pricking his eyes. You can write it however you want. She launched into his arms, Coco forgotten, and whispered, Then yes. Later that night, while Julia and Victor filled out the initial paperwork, Ellie brought down the binder of their story. On the title page, she had made a change with a gold marker. By Ellie Bennett Harrow and Dad. Victor traced the words with his thumb, and just like that, the name became more than ink. It became home. Snow fell heavily the night before Christmas, blanketing Eastbridge in soft silence. The small house glowed from within, firelight flickering, cinnamon sticks in mugs, the tree twinkling with ornaments, both new and old. Ellie had insisted on making a new one this year, a daisy made of felt, with Mara stitched in gold thread across the center. It hung near the top, just beneath the star. Victor stood by the window, watching the snow. Behind him, Ellie wrapped presents with Evelyn at the table, their quiet conversation filling the room with warmth. Julia entered carrying a small box and handed it to him. It's from her, she said softly. Victor opened it slowly. Inside was a simple leather journal. On the first page, in Mara's delicate handwriting, were the words, For when you finally come home. His eyes blurred with tears. Beneath the inscription, Mara had written short notes, quotes she loved, sketches and thoughts clearly intended for a future she once hoped for. One page read, I believe in stories and I believe he'll write a new one with her. Victor clutched the journal to his chest. That night, as they gathered around the tree, Julia handed Ellie one final gift, a manila envelope tied with red string. Ellie opened it and gasped. Inside were official documents with her new name and adoption confirmation. You're really my dad now, she whispered. Victor nodded, smiling through tears. I always was. Now it's just official. Evelyn wiped her eyes, whispering, Mara would have loved this. Ellie turned to her. She's already here. And in the quiet that followed, with snow still falling outside, they lit a single white candle in Mara's honor. Ellie placed it beside her felt ornament on the mantel. The room grew still, sacred almost. Later, after bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, Victor stepped outside, bundled in his coat, the journal under one arm. He stood beneath the porch awning, snowflakes melting on his cheeks, and looked up at the sky. Mara, he said softly, I broke my promise once. But I kept the second one. He opened the journal and began to write. Not for business, not for legacy, for love. Inside, Julia watched from the window, her hand resting on the glass. She knew he wasn't writing a story for the world anymore. He was writing for them, for Ellie, for Mara, for the life they had finally built out of everything lost. In the backyard, the wind picked up just enough to stir the chimes. They sang a familiar note, soft and bittersweet. Victor paused his writing and looked back toward the warm light of the house. Then he smiled and wrote the final line of that Christmas night. This time, he stayed. Spring returned to Eastbridge with soft rain and blooming promise. The trees burst into blossom again, and the backyard garden was now alive with rows of daisies, tulips, and laughter. Ellie had taken to wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat as she watered her flowers, declaring herself head of garden affairs. Victor played along, following her orders with playful obedience. One sunny afternoon, as Julia sat on the porch reviewing lesson plans, Victor emerged from the house holding 2 envelopes. His expression was thoughtful, touched with a quiet urgency. "I got this in the mail today," he said, handing one of the envelopes to Julia. She opened it and frowned, reading aloud. "Victor Harrow, inductee, National Business Leaders Hall of Legacy. Ceremony to be held in Washington, D.C." He nodded. "Apparently I've become an inspiration." Julia glanced up at him. "Are you going?" "I don't know," he said. "Feels like someone else's story." She folded the letter. "It's still part of yours, even if the ending changed." He handed her the second envelope. "This one's more interesting." Julia unfolded it, her brow furrowing again. "You're being invited to speak at a national education summit as the founder of the Mara Hope Foundation." Victor smiled gently. "They want to hear about what we've done here, about Mara, about Ellie." Julia looked at him, then out at the garden. "You're not that man anymore. You're something better now." He nodded. "But maybe I owe it to her to share what she started." That evening, they sat Ellie down at the dinner table. "Sweetheart," Victor began, "I've been invited to a big event. 2, actually." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Like a party?" "Sort of. One's in Washington, D.C., and the other's in Chicago. They want me to talk about you, about Mommy, and what we've built here." Ellie paused. "Will we all go?" Victor smiled. "If you want to. I'd like you there." Ellie clapped. "Yes, I want to see everything." Julia chuckled. "Well, it's settled then." Preparations began the next day. New clothes, travel plans, a visit to the courthouse to collect the final documents confirming Ellie's full adoption status. Victor held the paper in his hands for a long moment, tracing her name, Ellie Bennett Harrow, and feeling something permanent settle into place. But as the trip approached, an unexpected message arrived. A handwritten letter with no return address. Victor opened it alone in the den. Inside, the writing was familiar. Old, the ink slightly smudged. It was from Mara. Julia found him sitting silently on the couch, the letter in his lap. "She wrote it before she passed," he said, his voice hollow. "She gave it to Evelyn, told her to send it if I ever came back." He handed the letter to Julia, and together they read Mara's final words, words of forgiveness, of trust, and of quiet, abiding love. "If you're reading this, then you kept your second promise, and that's the one that mattered." Victor closed his eyes, overwhelmed, and outside the wind stirred the daisies gently in the garden. The trip to Washington, D.C. arrived like a whirlwind. For Ellie, it was an adventure. For Victor, it was a reckoning. They stayed in a quiet hotel just blocks from the capital, and as the city buzzed around them, Victor paced silently in the suite, the polished envelope of the ceremony invitation resting on the desk like a challenge. Julia watched him carefully. "Are you sure you want to go to this one?" He sighed. "I thought I did, but now, I don't know. It feels like honoring a version of me that doesn't exist anymore." Ellie, seated cross-legged on the bed, looked up. "But it's still part of your story, right? Like the sad chapters in our book, we don't skip them." Victor chuckled softly. "When did you get so wise?" "I have good editors," she replied, gesturing at both him and Julia. That night they attended the ceremony together. The room was grand, chandeliers, velvet curtains, rows of black-tie guests. Victor took the stage when called, and for a long moment he just stood there, staring out at the crowd. Then he set the speech he had prepared aside. "I was going to tell you about my success," he began, "but that's not what defines me anymore." He looked down at the front row, where Ellie sat in a gold dress, clutching Julia's hand. "I once broke a promise that nearly cost me everything. I left someone who believed in me. But somehow, through grace I don't deserve, I was given another chance. A chance to be a father, a chance to honor love, not legacy." The audience was silent. He continued, "My daughter saved me. Not with numbers or power, but with crayons, daisies, and the courage to say, 'You promised her.'" Somewhere in the back, someone exhaled audibly. "So I accept this honor," he finished, "not for what I built, but for what I rebuilt." Applause rose slowly, genuine and warm. After the ceremony, a man approached Victor, gray-haired, regal, clearly a figure in the business world. "You were the last person I expected to hear something like that from," he said. Victor smiled. "Same." Back in the hotel, Ellie ran up to him and jumped into his arms. "You were amazing," she said. "You didn't even need your paper." Victor held her tight. "I had everything I needed right in front of me." Julia joined them, slipping her hand into his. The next morning they traveled to Chicago for the Education Summit, but this time Victor wasn't the star. Ellie was. She stood beside him on stage, reading part of the story they had written together. "Sometimes families are made by love instead of time," she read aloud, her voice clear. "And sometimes promises come true in different ways than you expect." The room gave her a standing ovation. Victor wiped his eyes. He didn't need trophies anymore. He had her. He had them. And that was everything. The return to Eastbridge was quiet, almost reverent. The town was still, the streets familiar, but something inside the small family had changed. They had left as a story in motion and returned as something whole. In the weeks that followed, letters began pouring in to the Mara Hope Foundation, dozens of them, mothers, fathers, children, stories of absence, of pain, of healing, and always, somewhere in the margins, were words like, "Thank you and I believe again." Victor sat at the dining table one evening, letters spread out before him, his brow furrowed in thought. Ellie sat beside him, reading one aloud. "My dad left when I was 2, she recited, "but now I want to find him, because your story made me think maybe there's still a chance." She looked up at Victor. "Do you think he'll come back too?" Victor hesitated, then nodded. "I think if he reads this, and if he has a heart left, he will." Julia entered with hot cocoa, smiling faintly. "You're becoming something of a myth around here." Victor looked up, weary but fulfilled. "I didn't mean to." Julia handed him a cup. "No one ever means to be Hope. It just happens when you show up." The next day they received a call from a small publisher. Someone had forwarded them Ellie's school story. They wanted to turn it into a children's book. Victor stared at the phone in stunned silence as the voice on the other end made the offer. "We'd call it The Second Promise," the editor said. "It's not just her story. It's a story the world needs." Julia burst into tears the moment Victor hung up. Ellie, upon hearing the news, ran to her bedroom and came back with the original binder. "But this one stays here," she said firmly. "It's for us." Victor ruffled her hair. "Deal." That night, they sat by the fire reading through the manuscript. Evelyn had come over too, and for once her presence felt not like a ghost from the past, but a branch on their family tree, weathered, imperfect, but strong. Victor leaned back in the armchair, watching Julia laugh as Ellie animatedly explained each drawing. "This is what legacy should look like," he murmured. Julia nodded. "Not buildings, not plaques, but nights like this." They received the first draft of the illustrated version a few weeks later. The cover showed a little girl standing in a field of daisies, reaching toward a man kneeling with open arms. The title glowed in soft gold, The Second Promise, by Ellie Bennett Harrow and Dad Victor, traced the words with a trembling hand. "I still don't deserve all this," he whispered. Julia sat beside him. "You don't have to. You just have to keep showing up." He looked out the window at the stars, and for the first time in his life, Victor Harrow felt completely, undeniably, home. The weeks that followed were filled with unexpected moments of grace. The book's release date was set for early summer, and the publisher arranged a modest tour through schools and libraries across the state. Victor hesitated at first, unsure of his place in this new world of story time and elementary gymnasiums, but Ellie was thrilled. She began signing every email as author age 9 and asked if she could wear a special outfit for each reading. "Something with daisies," she said with complete seriousness. Victor, amused and humbled, agreed to every demand. On the day of the first event, they arrived at a small local library. The room was filled with kids sitting cross-legged on the floor, teachers lining the back, and one empty chair at the front. Victor sat there nervously, glancing at the little script Ellie had typed up and printed herself. She stepped confidently to the mic and cleared her throat. "My name is Ellie Bennett Harrow," she began, "and this is my dad. He broke a promise once, but then he made another one, and he kept it." "That's what our story is about." Gasps, applause, wide eyes. Victor took a shaky breath and began reading the first page. "There once was a girl who waited. She waited on porches, by windows, in dreams, until one day someone remembered her and came back." As he read, he felt the truth of every word settle over the room, not like weight, but like warmth. After the reading, one boy approached him with teary eyes and whispered, "I think my mom's going to come back too." Victor crouched beside him and said, "I believe she will, and even if she doesn't, you'll still grow strong, like daisies." Back in Eastbridge, the town organized a small celebration in their honor. The mayor, an old friend of Julia's, presented Ellie with a medal for bravery in storytelling and declared June 12th Second Promise Day. Victor smiled, humbled beyond words. That evening, under a canopy of lights strung across the backyard, friends and neighbors gathered. Evelyn brought a photo album she had finished curating, Mara's life, beginning to end, now preserved for Ellie with care. Ellie flipped through it slowly, stopping at a page with a photo of Mara on her porch, barefoot, holding a mug and smiling into the distance. "She was waiting," Ellie whispered. Julia put an arm around her. "Yes, baby. But now she's here, in all of this." Victor stepped away quietly for a moment, standing at the edge of the yard beneath the stars. The voices behind him felt like music, soft, true, enduring. And in that still moment, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded page from the journal Mara had left him. Her words echoed silently across the night. "If you plant love like a seed, even buried deep, it finds its way to the sun." He looked up at the sky, and he smiled. That summer, as the sun lingered longer in the sky and the world bloomed in full color, Victor found himself in a place he never thought he'd reach, not just forgiven, but rooted. The days were filled with routine and ritual, morning pancakes with Ellie, midday foundation meetings with Julia, evening walks through the neighborhood where everyone now waved with familiarity. One afternoon, Victor received a call from a New York reporter. They wanted an in-depth profile on him, his fall, his rise, and the book that was inspiring families across the country. "I'm not interested in legacy," he told them. "I'm interested in tomorrow." Still, the article was published. It went viral within days. But it wasn't Victor the world latched onto, it was Ellie. "Daughter's words help father rewrite his life" became the headline. Fan letters poured in. Teachers requested classroom copies of the book. A woman in Michigan started a Second Promise support group for estranged parents. Someone even created a scholarship in Mara's name. Victor kept every letter, storing them in a chest at the foot of Ellie's bed. Then one day, as they sat under the tree in the backyard, Ellie looked up from her sketchpad. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you never came back?" Victor swallowed. "Every day." "Would you still be rich?" He smiled. "Probably, but I wouldn't be alive." She tilted her head. "You mean, like your heart?" He nodded. "Exactly." She tore a page from her pad and handed it to him. It was a drawing of their family, him, Julia, Evelyn, and Ellie herself, all holding a long string that connected to a sun shining above. "That's Mommy," she said. "She's part of the light now." Victor stared at the drawing, his voice caught in his throat. "That's beautiful." Ellie leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're going to be okay, right?" He wrapped his arm around her. "We already are." That night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Victor and Julia sat on the porch again, watching the wind play through the trees. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," she said softly, "but now I think it just means remembering with love." Victor reached for her hand. "I used to think I couldn't love again." She looked at him. "And now?" "I love you," he said. No hesitation, no fear, Julia didn't smile immediately. She studied him, his sincerity, the steady way he met her gaze. Then she whispered, "I love you too." And in the stillness that followed, the wind chimes sang again, soft, certain. Inside the house, the binder of their story rested on a shelf between The Velveteen Rabbit and Charlotte's Web. The last page had been filled just days before. And when the promise was kept, the story truly began. And so it had. Autumn returned to Eastbridge like a long-held breath, cool, crisp, and tinged with gold. The leaves turned, the wind changed, and Ellie started 4th grade with her signature confidence and a backpack covered in daisy patches. The first time her teacher introduced her to the class, she stood proudly and said, "I'm Ellie Bennett Harrow. I wrote a book with my dad." Victor walked her to school that day. They held hands the whole way. At the door, she turned and whispered, "Don't forget to pick me up early. We have Foundation Thursday." He nodded. "I wouldn't miss it." The Mara Hope Foundation had outgrown its small office, now relocated to a larger community center downtown. Julia had taken on a formal director role, and Victor served as its ambassador, mentor, and quiet builder of hope. Together, they helped families find paths back to one another, some through letters, some through therapy, and others through forgiveness, spoken across years of silence. That Thursday afternoon, Victor stood in a conference room with Julia, reviewing the final stages of their newest outreach program, one focused entirely on helping incarcerated parents reconnect with their children through writing. "This one's close to the heart," Julia said. He looked over the pilot letters, raw, vulnerable, filled with longing. "They're all trying, that's what matters." As they packed up, Julia paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever worry that one day this will all fall apart?" Victor thought about it, about Mara, about the years lost, about the locket around his neck and the daisy drawings on Ellie's wall. "No," he said softly, "because I'm not holding it together alone anymore." Back home, Evelyn was baking apple pie with Ellie, teaching her how to crimp crusts properly. The kitchen was full of flour and laughter. Victor stepped into the room and smiled. "This smells suspiciously like a bribe," he said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Bribe? I call it love in slices." Ellie grinned. "Grandma said I could enter the school bake-off this year." Victor crouched beside her. "Then we'd better start training. There's no prize like second promise pie." That night, as the stars shimmered outside, Victor stood in Ellie's doorway watching her sleep. Her breathing was soft, steady, her arms wrapped around the same stuffed rabbit she'd had since age 4. Julia came up behind him. "She sleeps easier now," he nodded, "because she doesn't have to wonder anymore." Julia leaned against him. "Neither do I." Downstairs, the wind stirred again. The porch chimes whispered. Victor walked to the front door and stepped out. The night was cool, but clear. He took out the journal Mara had left him. He hadn't written in it in weeks. Tonight he opened it and wrote, "She is safe, she is loved, she is whole. So am I." Then he closed the book, held it to his chest, and looked out into the quiet, grateful for every sound, every step, every second. The promise had been kept, and the future was unfolding. The following weekend, Eastbridge hosted its annual Fall Festival, an event that transformed the small town into a storybook. Pumpkin patches lined Main Street, hay rides rolled past the fire station, and the air was filled with cinnamon and the sound of laughter. This year, the festival committee had chosen the second promise as the theme, dedicating a corner of the park to a story garden inspired by Ellie's book. Victor stood stunned as he walked through the display. Life-size daisies sculpted from paper and wire, quotes from the book painted on wooden signs, and children dressed in sun hats handing out bookmarks that read, "Everyone deserves a second promise." Ellie was the guest of honor. She sat in a small wooden chair signing copies of the book while parents and children lined up to meet her. One little girl, maybe 7, walked up and said, "My dad's in jail, but I'm going to write him a letter. Just like your book says." Ellie's eyes sparkled. That's really brave. I think he'll love hearing from you. Julia stood nearby, watching it all unfold with quiet pride. Victor approached her, still overwhelmed. Did you know they were doing this? She shook her head. I think Eastbridge is starting to believe again. They walked together through the rest of the festival, hand in hand, stopping to watch Ellie run through a corn maze with a few new friends. Evelyn joined them later, carrying apple cider and caramel treats. Her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. This town, she said with wonder, it's different now. Victor looked around. Maybe we all are. That night they returned home, tired but full. As they prepared for bed, Ellie walked into the room holding something behind her back. I have a surprise, she said. Victor and Julia exchanged glances. What is it? He asked. Ellie pulled out a small book, not the published one, but a handmade sequel titled The Promise Grows. On the cover she had drawn a tree growing from a heart-shaped seed, its branches filled with people holding hands. I started writing the next one, she said. It's about what happens after promises are kept. Victor sat down and opened the book. The first line read, Once upon a time, there was a family made of stories, and they kept planting love until it covered the whole world. Julia knelt beside her. It's beautiful. Ellie nodded seriously. It's not finished yet because our story's still going. Victor closed the book gently and looked into his daughter's eyes. You're right, he said, and I hope it never ends. Outside, the moon hung low over Eastbridge, casting silver across the garden. The wind chimes rang again, not a reminder this time, a celebration. As the days shortened and the chill deepened, the rhythm of life in the Bennett Harrow home slowed to a gentle hum. Mornings were marked by the sound of Ellie humming as she brushed her teeth, Julia sipping coffee while reviewing foundation paperwork, and Victor writing quietly in Mara's journal, which now held not sorrow but reflections on joy, on growth, on the unexpected beauty of second chances. One cold Saturday morning, they all bundled into coats and scarves and headed to the courthouse. Victor had one final step left in making everything whole. Inside, the judge smiled warmly at them. This is a rare occasion, she said. Most adoptions begin with hope. This one began with return. Victor nodded. And ends in peace. Ellie sat proudly between him and Julia, her birth certificate updated, her name now legally changed, Ellie Bennett Harrow. Victor signed the final document with steady hands. Afterwards, the clerk handed Ellie the official copy. She held it close, then looked up at her father. Now no one can ever say you're not mine, she whispered. Victor's eyes filled, and he wrapped her in his arms. No one ever could. On the way home, they stopped at the bookstore, where the second promise now sat on a featured shelf. A handwritten sign beside it read, A true story that changed our town and our hearts. Ellie pointed at it proudly. That's me, Victor chuckled. That's us. They bought a new copy, one Ellie said she wanted to donate to the school library. On the inside cover, she wrote in careful script, For anyone waiting on a porch, don't give up. Love will find you. The next morning, Victor received a letter postmarked from across the country. He opened it slowly and found a note from a man named Luis. It read, I was one of those who left, but I'm trying to go back. My daughter doesn't know me yet, but I bought your book. I'm going to read it to her when I see her again. Victor sat with the letter in his lap for a long time. When Julia entered the room, she found him staring out the window, the letter held gently in one hand. Another one? She asked. He nodded. They just keep coming. She joined him, placing her hand on his shoulder. You started something, she said. He looked at her. No. We did. That night, Ellie asked if she could write a letter to someone too. To who? Julia asked. To Mommy, Ellie said, just to tell her what's happening, just in case she can still see. They gave her space, and later she handed them the folded page. It said, Mommy, Daddy came back, he really stayed, and now I'm helping him help other people. Isn't that kind of like magic? Victor read it twice, then tucked it gently into the back of Mara's journal. No reply was needed. The promise had already answered. Winter arrived quietly, cloaking Eastbridge in frost and calm. The garden outside lay dormant under a dusting of snow, but inside the house, warmth bloomed in every corner, hot cocoa after school, books by the fire, the faint hum of Ellie singing as she decorated paper snowflakes for her room. The peace they had built was not loud or grand, but it was constant and real. One evening, Victor found himself alone in the den, flipping through the journal Mara had left him. Most of the pages were filled now, not just by his hand, but by Ellie's too. Between reflections and letters were doodles, tiny pressed flowers, even one crayon drawing of their family, under a sky filled with stars and the word forever scribbled across the top. Victor turned to a blank page and began to write. I used to think redemption was a destination, but it's not. It's a choice you make every day, especially when no one's watching. It's in every bedtime story, every school pickup, every moment you stay when it would have been easier to run. Just then, Ellie walked in, wearing her pajama top inside out and holding a book under her arm. Can we read together? She asked. He nodded, setting Mara's journal aside. They curled up on the couch, the fire crackling softly. She opened the book, Charlotte's Web, and began reading aloud. Her voice was steady, animated, full of feeling. As she read, Victor watched her face, the curve of her smile, the fierce joy in her eyes. Mara lived in her, not just in appearance, but in essence. When they reached the part where Charlotte says goodbye, Ellie hesitated. Victor gently took the book from her hands and finished the paragraph. They sat in silence for a moment. Is it okay that I still miss her? Ellie whispered. Victor wrapped an arm around her. Of course, I do too. Missing someone means they mattered. Ellie nodded. I think she's proud of us. He kissed the top of her head. I know she is. Later, after Ellie was asleep, Victor stood by her door and watched her for a long moment. Then he returned to the den and reopened the journal. He wrote, You told me once that if I ever came back I'd understand. I do now. Love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. I can't change the past, but I can hold the present with both hands. And I am. I promise. Just as he closed the journal, Julia entered the room wrapped in a soft sweater. Writing to her again, she asked. He nodded. It helps me stay close. She crossed the room and sat beside him. I think she hears you, in everything you do. Victor looked down at the worn cover of the journal, then at Julia's face, and he whispered, Then I hope she knows. I kept the promise, and I always will. Outside, the wind chimes stirred softly once more, less like memory, more like blessing. The one-year anniversary of Victor's return came quietly, without fanfare. No speeches, no reporters, just a simple evening at home. Julia made Mara's favorite dinner, lemon rosemary chicken with roasted carrots. Evelyn brought a cake, and Ellie, ever the planner, created a scrapbook titled Our First Year of Forever. Inside were photos, drawings, ticket stubs, even a small daisy pressed flat beneath a page marked Garden Day. They sat around the table after dinner, passing the scrapbook, each page a reminder of how far they'd come. This, Evelyn said softly, is the kind of legacy that doesn't make headlines, but it changes lives. Victor looked at the final page of the scrapbook. Ellie had written, The story isn't over, but the sad part is behind us now. He reached for her hand. Thank you for finding me. She squeezed his fingers. Thank you for coming back. That night, as snow began to fall again outside, Ellie stood by the window in her pajamas, watching the flakes dance. Do you think Mommy sees all this? She asked. Victor came up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I think she sees it every day. In you. They stood there together, father and daughter, watching the world turn white again, just as it had the night she first tugged on his suit at the gala and changed everything with 7 words. You promised her. Back inside, Julia stoked the fire and added a new photo to the mantel, one taken just days ago. In it, Victor sat in the backyard with Ellie on his lap and Julia beside them, all three laughing. The garden behind them alive with flowers even in the winter light. Victor joined her at the fireplace. "That's my favorite one," he said. Julia smiled. "Because we're all in it?" He nodded. "Because it's not posed. It's just true." Later, after Ellie had gone to bed, Victor returned to Mara's journal one last time. He opened to the back cover and with steady hand wrote the final entry. "You were right. Love did find its way. Not in the way I planned, but in the way we needed. She's brilliant. Julia is steady. Evelyn came back. And I stayed. This is our ending. And our beginning. Forever." He closed the journal and placed it gently into the cedar box Ellie had built in woodworking class. Then he turned out the lights, kissed Julia goodnight, and stood at Ellie's door one last time before sleep. She stirred and mumbled, "Night, Daddy." Victor smiled. "Good night, Ellie. I'll be here in the morning." The chimes on the porch whispered once more as wind rolled in from the trees. This time it carried no ache, no sorrow, only peace, only promise, only home.